Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
Kerry Clack, columnist, editorial board.
Greg Jefferson, Metro editor.
We're now down to the final week for city council hopefuls to file for the May 6th election. As we record this on Monday, February 13th, it's the beginning of the application process for the vacant District 7 seat, and we're all kind of expecting Rosie Castro to be the runaway favorite for that, but we'll be following that as over the coming weeks. But I wanted to start by talking about the big political event of last week, which was President Joe Biden's State of the Union address. And I'm someone who, in recent years, I think that particularly during the COVID period, I started questioning whether we really even need to continue with State of the Union addresses, whether they had outlived their usefulness, or how relevant they were. And I think whether you are a Joe Biden fan or not, whatever you thought of the speech, I think it was a lively television. I definitely came away feeling like there was there was a purpose to this. A lot sort of happened. And to me, it felt like there were two speeches. One, the first half, Biden was a real kind of bipartisan economic populism message. He's talking about Buy American. He's talking about, we're going to make microchips here. We're not going to depend on the Chinese. We're building infrastructure. He was saluting American workers and a lot of that kind of stuff. The second half, it got more partisan. It was the really contentious moment when he talked about Medicaid and Social Security. Kerry, what were your overall impressions of the speech and what happened that night?
I'm like you when it comes to just the whole purpose of the State of the Union. It's, but I guess it's such an ingrained tradition that we will always have it. But I know for most of them, including last Tuesday, I'm going into it looking at it as, it's going to be background noise.
I guess I should watch this, but do I want to watch
exactly.
it?
It's kind of like because of what we do, we almost have to. And but just listening to it, President Biden had a particular vigor that was kind of compelling, and it made me just kind of start paying attention. And for such a long speech, for someone who's not the most compelling orator, it didn't seem as long. Yeah, he had to go through the laundry list of things, and it was the typical Biden bipartisan kumbaya. But then, when that second half, when he got help from the opposition, is when it just went to a different level and made it one of the more memorable State of the Union, if not the most memorable State of the Union addresses in history.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it had an air of excitement about it. Yeah. particularly with Joe Biden. It's like, wow, that's like, who would have guessed?
And he was in the moment when he's dealing with like Republicans booing him. Well, he was quick on his feet, or in a way that I would not have expected.
Yeah, it was kind of weird, but I mean, if you ever watch the House of Commons,
it was very similar.
And
that's right.
Like prime ministers have to be sharp. They have to be on their toes. Yeah. And that's not something you really assign to Joe Biden, like those qualities. But yeah, I mean, he kind of held his own.
That's and it's like
that's true.
That spontaneous being able to give. I mean, that's one of Obama's traits. And I go back to another State of the Union address Obama's last one, where he says, I have no more political campaigns. And then the Republicans started, cheering sarcastically. And Obama said, that's because I won both of them. With Biden, though, with the whole, whether or not they were actually baiting the Marjorie Taylor Greens, I don't know. But just the fact that on his feet, I mean, the whole thing around Social Security and Medicare that was brilliant. And one of the things that we'll talk about Pose in a few minutes, that the speech had to do was just, because there's going to always be some question about his age. He's going to always make these verbal slip-ups. But man, that was a man that was fully engaged, that was on his feet, on his and in real time was able to handle hecklers and get everybody to agree that they're not going to cut Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah. Peter Baker on Washington Week said that the Biden team anticipated the heckling over Medicaid and Social Security. They were hoping for it. And which would explain why he was ready. I mean, basically what happened was he said that there are some people in the Republican Party who would like to sunset Social Security. Did he say Social Security and Medicaid? I know he said Social Security. Yeah. And so Republicans started booing and some yelling liar. And I mean, the background on this is that Rick Scott from Florida got into a lot of political trouble last year by proposing that Social Security and Medicaid be sunsetted. So it was actually true. And Biden kind of, as he went along, said, well, I'm not saying this is the majority Republican opinion, but there are some people. There's also a video that surfaced of Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee from Utah, saying a few years ago, my big goal is to phase out Social Security. I want to just pull it out from the root. So there is that thinking within the party, whether it's a common view or majority view or not, that's something different. But that really, from that point on, it just became kind of
the analogy that I know you would appreciate that I've heard folks use was the rope-a-dope.
Yeah.
I
mean, it would have been impossible to look at the Republican majority in the House and not figure out what's
going to set him off.
I mean, that's pretty easy. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not surprising that he was prepared, that they were actually counting on it.
I think aside from that, and he had his big moment where he said, okay, well, when they were saying his allegation wasn't true, he said, well, okay, we've got unanimity, so it's Social Security and Medicaid are off the books, and so he kind of laid a trap there for him. But I think in the first half of the speech, what was important for him is, whether people agree with his agenda or not, I don't think it's even debatable that he's passed more or signed more major domestic legislation in his first 2 years in office than we've seen from any president since LBJ. And yet you see some people in polls saying, well, I don't think he's really done anything. And you can say, I don't like what he's done. I disagree. I think, but it's strange that some people think he's kind of been a do-nothing president. And so he really had to kind of really make the case for himself. And I think in the first half of the speech, he went point by point and looked at some of the things that are happening. People are just beginning, I think, to feel the effects of the infrastructure bill, for example, if at all. That's going to be something over the next 2 years they will probably start to really be aware of. And I think he's trying to make them aware. This is something we did.
Whether you like the consequences or not, he's going to go down in history. Whether it's one term or two terms, at this point, I think he's going to be a two-term president. He's going to go down as one of the most consequential presidents in history, beginning with who he beat. That's going to be the most important thing, with who he beat and what he may have put a hold on, a barrier on from happening. But then you look at what he's done legislatively these first 2 years. Again, you may not like it. Yeah. But it's going to affect everyone.
And you were talking about polling, and 2 days before the State of the Union address, there was a Washington Post ABC poll, which surprised some people. We're really early in the game, but it had Donald Trump ahead of Biden by 3 points, 48-45 in a hypothetical matchup. Some people questioned the methodology behind this. I mean, among other things, you had Gen Z and millennials. If this poll can be believed, they have swung in a drastic fashion from Biden to Trump just over the past 3 months, based on exit polling that we saw in November. And so some people were thinking this was kind of questionable, but the day after the poll came out, our former mayor, Julian Castro, tweeted about it and said, it's the general consensus that Dems are content with Biden in a Trump rematch. But this poll undermines Biden's central argument for renomination. 2 years is forever, and it's just one poll. But if he's faring this poorly after a string of wins, he means legislative wins, that should be worrisome. Greg, what do you make of our former mayor kind of weighing in on this? And do you think he's got a point, or?
Part of it could be bad blood.
Explain.
Yeah. So, explain. I mean, so you'll remember during the Democratic primary for the last, in what was it now? 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like ages ago. So basically he said, and this is paraphrasing, doddering old man. basically, is what he accused Biden of being.
They were talking about healthcare, and he's like, don't you even remember what you just said?
Yeah, and he took a ton of criticism for that, justifiably. Didn't get, I think he feels like he's been kind of ignored or sidelined by the Biden administration. No real question of his participation in the administration. No, secretariat level position or anything like that. So yeah, I mean, that could be underscoring it. But I think Castro also at the same time is reflecting kind of what's in the broader electorate. I mean, there are questions about his age and whether, he has it in him to do a second term. And it's not really so much about, I don't think Democrats who are paying attention could look at Biden and say he's been an ineffective president. He's not. He's clearly been effective, given the political realities that he's had to deal with. I mean, who else could have gotten the infrastructure bill through? I mean, that was a huge accomplishment. And I know we've talked before about gun control legislation. I mean, he under his administration, we had some marginal gun control law that we probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
That's right.
And he helped that along. And it was a small step, but it was a step.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of Democrats are held back by his age. I mean, just the fact that he's how old is he?
Well, he's 80. He'll be 82. Right. He'll be I think 82 in election day. Is that right? Yeah. And or close to that. I think he would be 86 if he at the end of a second full term. So I think he'd be close to 82 on election day. And so I think there's that question. And if nothing else, I think the speech showed that at least right now he's still he looked like he was in good form. Yeah. I think people had wondered if sometimes you see him and he does look a little, I think he looks a little lethargic at times, What did you make of Julian's tweet?
I think he's right. And I look at it on two different levels. I think on one hand, Democrats and he specifically said Democrats, but I would also include, former Republicans and anti-Trumpsters. Trumpsters have to be worried about a poll like that, as flawed as it may be, because it just plays into this mood of what's going on out there, and just the lack of the divide between reality and people making up their own reality about, just making up their own facts. So there's a sense that no matter what Biden would do, there's going to be this attitude that he's done nothing. I also agree with Julian that it does play into, and it goes against what is Biden's greatest strength about being the only one who can beat Trump. But I go to what Greg just used the words, who else? Who else is going to? I mean, we know that Biden was the only one who could have beaten Trump in 2020. Right. Who else is going to do it? And I'm not even assuming that Trump is going to be the nominee. Say if it's DeSantis, and I do believe that the age thing is a problem, and as much in perception as reality. Who else? I don't know if the poll showed Trump against anybody else.
Yeah, I don't think so.
There's nobody else. I mean, this is where we're at, where regardless of what you think of Biden or his chances, there's no one else who is going to run as strong in 2024 for the Democrats as Joe Biden. Yeah,
and I think that was one of the things. I think that's something that maybe should be worrisome on a long-term basis for Democrats, that you had a really big 2020 primary field, and I think we came out of it with the person that everybody expected to get it, Biden, or a lot of people expected to get it, and no one really emerged from it. I think several candidates had some good moments, but nobody really emerged from it as like this is going to be the next generation. I mean, Pete Buttigieg certainly enhanced his status. That might be somebody. Strangely, and I don't think it's all her fault. And I think there's a lot that plays into it. Strange that also applies to his vice president, who is is not in a position to where if Biden wanted to just turn the reins over to. I mean, she couldn't win. I hate to say that, but she couldn't. Yeah. I think, and I went to mention, as Julian mentioned, I mean, this is really early. Things change so much, and I was going back because I can't help myself. I love doing this kind of stuff. Looking back at where we were at a similar time in previous election cycles, going way back to 1983. And of course, things were not as partisan back then. Now people tend to be a little more locked into their party affiliation, so it's harder to move voters as we did then. But in early 1983, there was a poll, I think it was a Harris poll, that had Walter Mondale 9 points ahead of Ronald Reagan. They ended up meeting in November of 84. Reagan beat him by 18 percentage points in the popular vote and won like 49 out of 50 states. But in early 1983, he had a recession. And his poll numbers were really bad, and Republicans were not talking about dumping him, but they were very nervous at that point. And so things can change. I found another one which is maybe a little more relevant because it's more recent, where Mike Huckabee was talking about this, and it was true that there was a major poll in I think this was 2012. This must have been early 2011 that had him tied with Barack Obama in a hypothetical race. And I don't think there's any way Mike Huckabee would have run a dead heat with Barack Obama in November of 2012 if they had met. But in early 2011,
even if you go back to 1984, up until the first debate between Reagan and Mondale, it was a race. Yeah. And then Reagan unleashes the line about not holding Mondale's age against him, and then it was over.
Youth and experience.
Youth and experience.
Yeah, and it's so. I mean, we don't know where the economy is going to be next year. We don't know what kind of foreign policy crises could come up. We certainly didn't anticipate COVID and the effect that was going to have on the 2020 election.
I mean, if I could just jump in really fast. I mean, it does seem that. Biden could have a good next few months. Mm-hmm. So he could be well positioned heading into 2024 because we were expecting a recession. And what we're seeing is actually, it's not great growth, but we're seeing growth in the economy where we had expected kind of retrenchment. Mm-hmm. And that always, that's always good news for a sitting president.
Yeah.
I think you mark the tape. I think Biden is reelected in 2024. I wouldn't have been this confident about a year ago. I wouldn't have been this confident about a year ago. But just looking at where he is now, where the country is now, and where the Republicans are now.
Do you think DeSantis would be tougher for him than Trump?
I'm not sure. I'm
not sure either.
And
I just want to see how DeSantis plays nationally.
I don't. That's the question. I don't think he can. Yeah, I said I don't think he.
They love him in Florida. Yeah.
I just think he has no personality.
Well, that's the thing. I wonder if he has the Ted Cruz syndrome, where he just doesn't quite connect on a national level.
That's a great question. Like a very different personality. But Rick Perry
makes Ted Cruz seem like Hubert Humphrey, though. He's uncommonly humorless. And just dislikable. He's also smart. Yeah. Which is the scary.
Well, Mark Leibovich in his book, his recent book about the Trump era and the Republicans, I think he just said that when DeSantis was in Congress, he's basically viewed as kind of like a weirdo, kind of a weird sort of guy who's kind of socially awkward by his fellow colleagues, even his fellow Republican colleagues. So it's kind of interesting that he's become this rock star. But a very different personality. But it does remind me of like Rick Perry in Texas when Rick Perry was the front runner for a brief moment when he ran for president, and very quickly it just became obvious like Rick Perry's act, which had been so effective in Texas on a political basis, just did not play on a national level. It just was not. It didn't work.
He came off as a bit of a dummy.
Maybe that's where I'm going.
But this is the question I ask: Is there a third alternative? Because ultimately, I cannot believe that Trump would still get the nomination, but I understand where that party is now. It could happen.
Yeah.
I also see him just destroying DeSantis.
Yeah.
And maybe we make it to the point where DeSantis doesn't want to run. But I don't know if who is it that comes in between.
Yeah.
That's what I don't know.
Yeah. And pretty much everybody else who has been they've asked about in polls as far as the Republican primary, Ted Cruz and various others, Nikki Haley, they're all like around 1% or something like that. So it's looking like it's going to be those two. I want to talk about Mayor Ron Nirenberg, who had his official campaign kickoff on Saturday. He's running for his fourth term, and this is easily going to be this will be the easiest campaign he's had. His first 2 elections were close runoff wins. His third one was, somewhat competitive rematch with Greg Brockhouse, although Nirenberg ended up winning, I think, by about a 2-1 margin. This time there's really no serious opposition. So we know he's going to get elected to a 4th term. And since I can't resist kind of jumping ahead, I wanted to get your thoughts on, based on where he is now, nearly 6 years into what will probably be an 8-year tenure as mayor. What do you think his big legacy will be? When we talk about Henry Cisneros, I think the first thing people talk about is economic development. He helped San Antonio move into the modern era and so on. With Julian Castro, pre-K for SA and decade of downtown. What's the first? What are people going to talk about?
I mean, it's very with Ron Nirenberg, it's very reactive, right? It was his handling of the pandemic. Yeah. So he really shined in that moment. Him and Bexar County Judge Nelson Wolf, they were on television just about every night, kind of talking through the latest numbers, what they meant, how San Antonians can take care of themselves. They imposed restrictions when they were needed and did kind of yeoman's work. But that doesn't really you can't look at that and say, okay, well, from that you can kind of deduce some kind of vision for the city. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's one thing Nirenberg, in my view, has never been able to do. Just articulate what it is he wants for the city of San Antonio and how we're going to get there. We just don't know. 6 years into, his time in office as mayor, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know where he wants to take the city.
Yeah, I mean, he came in. I mean, climate was a big thing. There have been some strides on that, though probably not enough for some people in the environmental community. He talked a lot about mobility when he came in, and VIA will end up getting. They're waiting for the funding, but they will end up getting more funding, and they've been able to leverage it to get some outside funding. So there's been some progress on that. And then certainly workforce development became a big thing for him after the pandemic. And I think a lot also when we talk about him will depend on how well that workforce development program ends up panning out.
Right. And I've noticed he doesn't seem to talk about it all that much. and I think it's because there were problems with the program early on. Yeah. Maybe they've been smoothed out. And maybe he's taking a wait and see approach. Like maybe that is actually what will come to be seen in his
on
legacy.
A policy.
Yeah, but it's not something, it's not something he's talking about at every opportunity.
Yeah. What do you think, Greg?
I agree with the most part with what Greg says. I think if you take away COVID, it's possible that Nirenberg could kind of just float through 8 years of being mayor and, having some successes, but not any defining moments. What COVID did was allowed him to, along with Judge Wolf, to show his leadership qualities and speak knowledgeably and in a way that calms people down every day with those press conferences. It's very possible, he has 2 more years left, and maybe. But that sense of not urgency, but just knowing these are the 2 years that may define me beyond being the COVID mayor. Maybe this is where we find out what will be his legacy.
Yeah, I'm going to hold off on asking where do you think he goes from here because we'll give ourselves that one to talk about later on down the line. That'll be fun to speculate about.
Not governor. We'll just
All right. Before we wrap things up, the one big sort of question mark when it comes to the city council races has been District 10, where Clayton Perry, is facing legal problems, and he's the big scandal over his hit and run accident, which happened a few months ago, in which he was apparently intoxicated, and he's kept everybody guessing about whether he's going to run again. He has to decide by Friday or file by Friday. By the time you hear this, he may have made a decision. You may know more than we know as we're talking to you, but he has not announced anything. And the really interesting thing has been Mark White, who Clayton Perry went to in 2019 when Clayton Perry was thinking about running for county commissioner. He let Mark White know. He said, you ought to seek the appointment. And we really, kind of lobbied for him at City Hall. And then, of course, Clayton Perry decided not to run for county commissioner. So it was like, I changed my mind. But Mark White, about 3 months ago was saying he would not run in District 10 unless Clayton Perry didn't run. Then a few weeks ago, he said he'd be willing to run regardless. I think last week, the Express News had a story saying that he still was on the fence. We're hearing now that it looks like he's made a decision.
Yeah. I mean, and he did what we reported last week was that he had a campaign in all but name. He had done all of the groundwork. He'd lined up a campaign treasurer, campaign manager. He had a finance director who actually used to be, Norma Denham. She had been Clayton Perry's fundraiser. Wow. Now she's
willing to put some serious money into this.
Yeah. He's it's not a gift. He's loaning his own campaign, $50,000. That'll be repaid. Mm-hmm. You know, if he were to win the seat, he could repay himself through contributions later. But he's trying to signal that, hey, this is for real. I'm serious about winning this seat. I have broad support. Yeah. And I say that because he has the backing of at least 3, probably more, former District 10 council members, including Mike Gallagher, John Clamp, and Carlton Souls. Mm-hmm. So he's got that going in. And now he's said, hey, I'm running. Yeah. But we kind of knew he was headed in that direction.
Right. A couple hours before we started recording this podcast, Mark White posted on Facebook that I'm in and let's get ready, District 10. And he said more details to follow. So that, again, things may change in the next few hours, but it's, as of now, we don't know if he's going to be running against Clayton Perry or if he's...
Well, that's right. Yeah. So, there have been a number of former District 10 council members, political donors, business people in District 10 who have met with, we're told they've met with Clayton Perry. And, after kind of the obligatory thank you for your service, you've done great work in District 10. Came the second part, which is now, could you please step aside?
Yeah.
Just
finish out your term. And,
exactly. The idea being that he's just damaged goods. And, Clayton Perry only has the potential for one more 2-year term. Mm-hmm. Then he'll be at the end of his term limits. But in that time, he's going to be, if he were to win re-election, he'd be hamstrung. We don't even know if he would get his city council committee assignments back. Yeah. Those were the mayor pulled those like within days of the allegation of the drunken driving accident. We don't know if you get those back, and that's it sounds kind of a little bit arcane, but it's on those council committees where you actually kind of massage and formulate city policy. Whatever city council winds up voting on, often it starts with these committees. So the question is, how well are you really representing District 10 if you don't have a voice on any of those decision-making committees? So that's a big deal. And then there is, with every twist and turn of he's got 2 criminal charges against him. Mm. With every twist and turn in his case, the media, including the Express News, will be covering it. Yeah. So it's going to be kind of this ever-present thing, unless, he reaches an agreement with prosecutors to get it taken care of.
You'd think he'd be able to read the acorns on the ground.
Right, you would think. The thing is, we're in a territory where he's got a number of people trying to talk him out of running again. And he may be listening. We don't know. What we've learned is that he has a pretty small circle, a pretty small kind of cabinet, really, of advisors. We've heard all kinds of contradictory things. Yes, he's going to run. No, he's not going to run. He's going to step aside. No, he's getting up for a fight. So we don't know what his intentions are, but it kind of looks like he's wrestling with, if I'm not a council member, who am I?
That's what I've heard too.
That's a really hard one for those trying to talk him out of running again. Like, if his identity is tied up in being a council member.
My understanding is he doesn't have family in San Antonio. He's divorced, and so this is really this is kind of his life.
And that's the thing. I mean, you see this sometimes with some council members. It's and this, not to get like existential here, but it kind of it fills a void. Maybe it becomes part of your identity, and you can't separate yourself from it. Yeah. Like where does Clayton Perry end, and where does being a council member begin? And you don't know.
Yeah. Well, we will probably we'll probably learn a lot more in the next few days. And I want to thank you all for listening. Hope everybody's doing well. We'll be back with you next week. Take care.